storm hit without warning, and the horse went down hard at the edge of a ravine, throwing Tessa Brow into the mud like she weighed nothing at all. She lay there for 1 breath, 2, rain hammering her back, the cold eating through her clothes straight to her bones. Then she lifted her head and saw it, the iron gate of the Keldran estate, standing dark and tall against the lightning-cracked sky. Every soul in the northern counties knew what that gate meant. The Duke of Keldran was not a man you approached uninvited. He was not the man you asked for help. He was the kind of man people whispered about in low voices and forgot to mention by name in polite company. But Tessa had a letter pressed against her chest, soaked through and still breathing with secrets that could either save her family or bury them. And the only person with the power to decide which lived beyond that gate. So she stood up, mud and all, and she walked straight toward it. Now here is what I want to ask you before we go any further. Knowing what she was walking into, knowing the danger, knowing the Duke's reputation, do you think she was brave, or do you think she had simply run out of choices? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us which part of the world you are watching from. We genuinely love hearing from you. If this story already has you curious, subscribe. It only gets more gripping from here. The storm had been chasing her for 3 hours before it finally caught her. Tessa Brow had felt it building since midday, a low pressure in the air that made her horse nervous and her skin prickle. But she had pushed on, because stopping was not something she could afford to do. Not today. Not with what she was carrying. The leather satchel strapped across her back held a single sealed document. 1 page, 12 lines of careful, deliberate handwriting. A confession signed by a man who was now dead, naming the person who had truly poisoned Lord Grieve of Dunfeld 3 months ago and left an innocent man rotting in a prison cell waiting to hang for it. That innocent man was her father. The real killer had friends in powerful places. The magistrate who had overseen the trial was one of them. The 2 witnesses who had testified against her father were another. The entire case had been constructed carefully, neatly, with her father placed at the center of it, like a piece moved on a board by hands he never saw. Tessa had spent 3 months unraveling it, thread by thread, quietly, without telling anyone what she was doing, because the moment the wrong person found out, the confession would disappear, and so would she. She had gotten the signed document 4 days ago from a dying man named Corvin, a former servant of the real killer, who had carried the guilt of his silence for 3 months and could not carry it any longer. Corvin had pressed the folded paper into her hands in the back room of a coaching inn, 2 counties south, and made her promise she would get it to someone with enough power and enough integrity to use it properly. There was only one name she trusted for that: the Duke of Keldran. She had never met him. She knew him only by reputation, and his reputation was not a comfortable one. He was described as cold, exacting, and entirely without patience for games or social performance. He had removed 2 corrupt magistrates from their positions in the past 5 years, using nothing but documented evidence and a will like iron. He did not take bribes. He did not bend to pressure. He answered to no one except the law as it was actually written, not as powerful men preferred to interpret it. He was exactly what she needed. The storm made the decision for her when her horse went down at the edge of a ravine in the dark, throwing her hard into wet ground. She lay still for 1 stunned breath, rain hammering her back, then lifted her head and saw the iron gate of the Keldran estate standing 30 feet away in a crack of lightning. She pressed her hand against the satchel. Still there. Still sealed. She got up and walked toward the gate. It opened when she pushed it, heavy and slow, and she moved through without stopping. The gravel path ahead of her led straight to the main house, a vast, dark shape with lit windows burning amber against the black sky. She focused on those lights and kept walking. She was halfway up the path when a figure stepped out of the shadows to her left. He was broad, young, with the build of someone who worked outdoors and a long coat soaked through from the rain. He was holding a lantern and pointing it directly at her face with no apology for the brightness. "This is private land," he said. "Who are you and what do you want?" "My name is Tessa Brow," she said, squinting against the light. "I need to speak with the Duke. It is urgent and it cannot wait until morning." "Nothing is so urgent it cannot wait for daylight," the young man said. "A man will hang in 11 days, Tessa said. "He is innocent. I have proof, and the people who put him there will take that proof from me the moment they find out I have it, which means every hour I wait is an hour closer to losing it. So yes, it cannot wait." The lantern held steady on her face for a long moment. Then the young man said, "Come with me." His name was Davin. He was, she quickly understood, not a guard, but something closer to a personal attendant, the kind of young man who had grown up on the estate and knew every stone of it. He led her to the front door, knocked twice in a particular pattern, and stepped back. The door was opened by an older man with a straight back and a face that had been trained over decades to reveal nothing. He looked at Tessa with the particular stillness of someone who has seen surprising things arrive at this door before and made peace with it. "Marsh," Davin said. "She needs the Duke. I think he should hear her." Marsh looked at Tessa, then at the satchel on her back, then at Davin. "Wait here," he said. The entrance hall was warm and entirely silent. A housemaid named Otti took her wet coat with quick, careful hands and disappeared with it. Tessa stood in the candlelit hallway and tried to slow her heartbeat. Portraits watched from the walls, heavy-framed and unsmiling. A long staircase curved upward into shadow. She heard footsteps from above, slow, unhurried, deliberate. Someone who was not in a hurry because they had decided at some point in their life that hurrying was a thing done by people who had not yet learned to control their circumstances. She looked up. The Duke of Keldran came down the stairs the way a man comes into a room he owns, which he did, because he owned every room in it. He was taller than she had imagined, younger too, mid-30s, with dark hair and a face built from sharp angles and long patience. He was not in formal dress. He wore dark trousers and a plain white shirt, the collar open, the sleeves turned back at the wrist. He looked like a man who had been awake and working, not sleeping. He stopped on the last step and looked at her. She looked back. "You rode here in this storm," he said. "My horse fell in the ravine," she said. "I walked the rest." "For what purpose?" She reached into the satchel and held out the sealed document. "To give you this," she said, "and to ask you to save my father's life." The Duke looked at the document in her outstretched hand for a moment. He did not take it immediately. He came down the last step, walked toward her, and stopped close enough that she could see the detail in his expression, which was not cold exactly, but extremely controlled, the face of a man who had learned to think before he reacted to anything. Then he took the document. He turned it over, examined the seal, looked at her. "Who gave this to you?" he said. "A man named Corvin," she said. "He was a servant in the household of Lord Ferris Crane for 11 years. He died 2 days ago in a coaching inn south of Weldmere. Before he died, he signed this. He told me everything." "Lord Crane," the Duke repeated. The name landed in the room with a particular weight. "Yes," Tessa said. She watched his face. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and deliberate, like a man sorting through information he already had and placing a new piece in its correct position. "Come," he said, and walked toward a room off the main hall without looking back to see if she followed. She followed. The room was a study, lined floor to ceiling with shelves of books and bundled documents. A fire burned low in the grate. A wide desk sat in the center of the room, covered in papers, maps, and open ledgers. 2 candelabras burned on opposite ends of it, filling the space with warm, unsteady light. The Duke went to the desk, broke the seal on the document with careful, precise fingers, and read. Tessa stood near the door and waited. She had been waiting for 3 months. She could manage another few minutes. He read slowly. That surprised her. She had expected someone who processed information quickly, skimming for the essential points. Instead, he gave every line the same careful attention, and when he reached the end, he went back to the beginning and read it again. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at her. "Sit down, Miss Brow," he said. She sat in the chair across from the desk. He remained standing, one hand resting flat on the document. "Your father is Aldous Brow," he said. "Yes." "Convicted 6 weeks ago of the poisoning of Lord Grieve of Dunfeld, sentenced to hang." "Yes." "And you believe this document changes that?" "I do not believe it," Tessa said. "I know it. Corvin was in the room when it happened. He saw Lord Crane administer the poison himself. He saw it and he said nothing, because Lord Crane had given him money and told him what would happen to him if he spoke. But Crane is dead now, and Corvin has nothing left to protect." She kept her voice level. "My father was Lord Grieve's closest friend for 30 years. He had no reason to harm him. The case against him was built on 2 paid witnesses and a magistrate who owes Lord Crane's family a very large favor." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "You uncovered all of this yourself," he said. It was not quite a question. "There was no one else to do it," Tessa said simply. A silence opened between them. The fire shifted in the grate. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease slightly, the rain pulling back from a roar to a steady drum. "Why me?" the Duke said. "There are courts. There are procedures for appealing a conviction." "I went to the Court of Appeal 6 weeks ago," Tessa said. "My application was refused. The presiding officer was a personal associate of the magistrate who oversaw my father's trial." She met his eyes steadily. "The procedures that exist to protect innocent people have been used in this case to protect the people who harmed them. I need someone outside that circle, someone with enough standing to present this evidence somewhere it will actually be heard, and with enough character that they cannot be pressured into making it disappear. And you decided that person was me." "I was told you removed Magistrate Holt from office 3 years ago," she said. "I was told you did it with documents and patience, and without being bought or frightened off. I was told you have a particular dislike for people who use the law as a personal tool." She paused. "I decided that person was you." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Marsh appeared silently in the doorway. The Duke glanced at him. Something passed between them in the way of people who have worked together long enough to communicate without words. "Miss Brow will need a room for the night," the Duke said. "Have Otti prepare one, and send for Davin. I need the South Road watched from now until morning." Marsh nodded and was gone. Tessa looked at the Duke. "The South Road?" "If this document is what you say it is," the Duke said, picking it up again carefully, "then the people named in it have a strong interest in knowing where it is. You said you have been careful, but you have also been traveling for 4 days and arrived here in the middle of a storm. careful people can still be followed by patient ones. The thought landed in her chest like cold water. She had been so focused on getting here, on keeping the document safe and dry and sealed, on putting one foot in front of the other through 3 months of fear and grief and exhaustion, that she had not fully considered what would happen once she stopped moving. "You think someone followed me?" she said. "I think it is worth finding out before morning," the Duke said. He set the document down, looked at her directly, and said something she had not expected. "You have done something that most people would not have had the endurance or the courage to do. 3 months of this, alone, with your father's life on the line." He paused. "I am going to read this document thoroughly tonight. I am going to cross-reference it against information I already hold, and tomorrow morning I am going to tell you exactly what I can do and how quickly I can do it." Tessa felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not yet. Relief was still 11 days away at the earliest. But something, the particular feeling of having carried a weight alone for a very long time, and having someone else, finally, at last, reach out and take hold of the other end of it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, brief and direct. Otti appeared at the door. Tessa stood, straightened her back, and followed the maid out of the study. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. The Duke was already at his desk, the document open before him, a fresh candle pulled close, reading with that same slow and total attention he had given it the first time. She turned and walked down the hall. In the room, Otti prepared for her, warm and quiet, with a fire already burning. Tessa sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 months, to breathe. Her father had 11 days. But tonight, for the first time, 11 days felt like enough. Tessa did not sleep. She had told herself she would. She had lain down on the bed in the warm room Otti had prepared, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, closed her eyes, and listened to the storm finish dying outside the window. And still sleep would not come. Her mind kept moving, turning over the same edges, the same fears, the same calculations she had been running for 3 months without pause. 11 days. She sat up after an hour and went to the window. The rain had stopped. The grounds of the Keldran estate stretched out below her in the dark, wet and still, the gravel path gleaming faintly under a sky that was beginning to clear at its edges. She could see the iron gate at the far end of the path. Closed now. Beyond it, the road that had brought her here disappeared into the dark line of trees. She was watching those trees when she saw the light. It was small, amber, moving slowly along the tree line, parallel to the road, in a way that no lantern carried by a normal traveler would move. A normal traveler used the road. A normal traveler had no reason to stay in the trees at the edge of a private estate at 2 in the morning. Her breath stopped. She pressed her hand against the window glass and watched the light move. It paused. Then a second light appeared further along the tree line, answering the first. 2 of them, moving in a pattern that had nothing accidental about it. She was away from the window and out of the room before she had finished thinking through what she was doing. The corridor outside was dark, except for a single candle burning in a holder on a small table near the staircase. She took it and moved quickly, keeping her footsteps light on the stone floor. She did not know the layout of this house. She had been brought to her room by Otti through 2 turns and a long corridor, and now she retraced it from memory, holding the candle low. She found the staircase and came down it fast. The study door was still lit at its edges. She pushed it open without knocking. The Duke was at his desk, exactly as she had left him, except that the document was now to one side, and he had 3 other papers open before him, covered in his own handwriting. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw in her face made him straighten immediately. "There are 2 lights moving through the tree line along the east edge of your grounds," she said. "I watched them from my window for several minutes. They are not moving like travelers. They are moving like people who do not want to be seen." The Duke was on his feet before she finished the sentence. He crossed the room, went to the window, and looked out. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and went directly to the door, pulled it open, and said one word into the dark corridor. "Davin." The young man appeared from somewhere nearby so quickly that Tessa suspected he had not been sleeping either. "East tree line," the Duke said. "2 lights at least. Take Hob and go around the south wall. Do not engage. Find out how many there are and where they came in. Then come back." Davin was gone without a word. The Duke turned to Tessa. "How long were you watching before you came down?" 4 minutes, she said. "Perhaps 5. Did they move toward the gate at any point?" "No, they stayed in the tree line, but they were moving closer to the house." "Slowly." He nodded. He went back to the desk and opened the bottom drawer, and what he took from it was not a weapon, but a small, flat metal box. He unlocked it with a key from his coat pocket and removed 3 folded documents from inside it, including the one Tessa had brought. "If anyone breaks into this house tonight," he said, "these do not stay here. There is a priest hole behind the east bookshelf, 3rd panel from the left. It opens if you press the lower corner. These go in there, and you go in with them." Tessa stared at him. "You think they will actually come inside?" "I think people who follow a woman for 4 days through 2 counties and then creep along a tree line in the dark at 2 in the morning are not here to have a polite conversation," he said. "I think Lord Crane may be dead, but the people who served his interests are very much alive and very aware that a loose document signed by a dead man is the only thing standing between them and safety." He looked at her directly. "I think you have been more closely watched than you realized." The words settled over her like ice water. She had been careful. She had changed inns twice. She had taken a longer route north, specifically to avoid the main roads. She had told no one where she was going, except her younger sister Brinley, and only in the vaguest possible terms. "My sister," she said suddenly. "Brinley is at home alone. If they know where I went, they know where I came from." "Where is your home?" "Dunfeld, 2 counties south." The Duke went to the door again. Marsh. Marsh was there in moments, as though the entire household had quietly risen and positioned itself throughout the building without making a sound. "Send word to the Brow household in Dunfeld by the fastest rider," the Duke said. "Tonight. There is a young woman there alone who may need assistance. The rider is to go directly and wait for a reply." Marsh was gone. Tessa stood in the middle of the study and felt the ground shift slightly beneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the building. She had spent 3 months being the one who planned everything, who thought 3 steps ahead, who held every thread at once because there was no one else to hold them. And now, in the space of 1 hour, this man had taken hold of more threads than she had known were loose and was pulling them taut with a quiet, total efficiency that made her chest feel strange. She did not have time to think about that. A sound came from somewhere at the back of the house. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a single sharp crack, like wood under pressure, and then silence. The Duke crossed the room in 4 strides and was in the corridor before Tessa had fully registered what she had heard. She went after him. The back of the house opened into a long service corridor that ran the width of the building. 3 doors led off it, all closed. The Duke stopped in the center of the corridor and listened. Tessa stopped behind him and did the same. There was a sound under the door at the far left end. Breathing. More than one person. The slow, deliberate non-movement of people trying to be still. The Duke picked up the iron candle holder from the wall bracket beside him, not as a weapon exactly, but with the particular grip of a man who had decided what he was prepared to do. He looked back at Tessa once. His eyes moved to the document in her hands, then back to her face. She understood. She pressed herself against the wall and did not move. He crossed to the far left door in silence, put his hand on the latch, and threw it open. 2 men stood in the small storage room beyond it. They were not dressed as gentlemen. They wore dark, plain clothing, the kind that disappeared into shadows. One of them was holding a short iron bar. The other had his hand inside his coat. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then the Duke said, in a voice so completely calm it was almost frightening, "You have broken into a peer's household in the middle of the night. Every second you remain here adds to what you will answer for. I would think very carefully about the next decision you make." The man with the iron bar looked at the one with his hand in his coat. Something passed between them. Then the one with his hand in his coat pulled it out empty, and both of them looked at the floor. It was not courage that made them stop. Tessa understood that later, turning it over in her mind. It was a calculation. They were hired men. Hired men weighed costs, and the cost of whatever they had been offered had just run directly into the reality of where they were standing and who was looking at them. Davin appeared at the far end of the corridor with Hobb behind him, a large, weathered man who looked like he had seen far more difficult situations than this one, without losing any sleep over any of them. Davin took one look at the 2 intruders and positioned himself in the doorway, with the particular stillness of someone who was hoping, quietly, that they would try something. They did not try something. Within 20 minutes, both men were secured in the groundskeeper's outer building, with Hobb standing guard. A local magistrate had been sent for, and Tessa was back in the study, sitting in the chair across from the desk, with a cup of something hot that Otti had produced from somewhere and pressed into her hands without being asked. Tessa held the cup and looked at the fire. "They will not talk," she said. "Men like that never do." "They do not need to," the Duke said. He was at his desk again. "Their presence here tonight is itself evidence. Combined with what Corvin signed, it builds a picture that is significantly harder to dismiss than a single document from a dead servant." She looked at him. "You are already thinking about how to use this." "I have been thinking about how to use it since I read it the first time," he said. He met her eyes across the desk. "Your father does not have 11 days to wait for a formal appeal process. I am going to write 3 letters tonight. One to a judge in the capital who owes me nothing and cannot be pressured. One to a member of the House of Lords who has been looking for grounds to challenge Lord Crane's estate for other reasons entirely. And one to the prison governor at Heldwick, instructing him that Aldersbrough is not to be moved, transferred or harmed in any capacity until further legal notice under my personal authority." Tessa felt something tighten in her throat. "That last letter," she said. "Does it carry enough weight?" "The Duchy of Keldran has carried that weight for 200 years, he said, without arrogance, simply as a fact. "It will carry it tonight." She nodded. She looked down at the cup in her hands. "Why?" she said quietly. You did not know me this morning. You owe my family nothing. You could have turned me away at the door, and no one would have thought less of you for it." The room was quiet. The fire had settled into a deep, steady burn. "Because the law is only worth the people who are willing to defend it when it is being misused," the Duke said. "And because your father is innocent. And because you have fought for 3 months for something that should not have required fighting for in the first place." He paused. "Those reasons are enough." Tessa said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would be adequate, and she had learned long ago that inadequate words were worse than silence. She sat with the fire and the silence, and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of not being alone in this any more. Morning came grey and cold, with a clean-washed sky and long shadows across the wet grounds. Tessa was up before the household stirred, standing at the window of her room, watching the east tree line in the early light. It was empty. Still, whatever had moved through those trees in the dark had either been caught or retreated, and in the flat grey of early morning, the grounds looked peaceful in a way they had not managed to feel the night before. She dressed, twisted her hair back simply, and went downstairs. The study door was open. The Duke was not in it. The desk had 3 sealed letters on it, stacked neatly, each addressed in a hand that was precise and unhurried. Beside them sat Corvin's document, and next to that, a single sheet of paper with notes written in the same hand. She did not read the notes. She looked at the sealed letters and felt the specific weight of knowing that someone had stayed awake all night on her behalf. Ottie found her in the corridor and brought her to a small breakfast room at the side of the house. A fire burned. Food was laid. Marsh was standing near the window, with a look on his face that said the night had been long for him as well. "The magistrate came at 4 this morning," Marsh said, without preamble, apparently having decided that formality was a lesser priority this morning than information. "He took both men into custody. One of them gave a name before they left. Not voluntarily. The other one said it trying to bargain." He paused. The name was Pelwick. Tessa went still. "Sir Galt Pelwick? You know him," Marsh said. "He was Lord Crane's closest associate," she said slowly. "He managed Crane's affairs, his properties, his connections. If Crane poisoned Lord Grieve, Pelwick almost certainly knew about it." She sat down at the table without meaning to. "He knew about it, and he let my father hang for it." "He let your father be sentenced to hang," Marsh corrected carefully. "Aldous Brow is still alive." She pressed her fingers against the table and breathed. "Where is the Duke?" she asked. "He rode out an hour ago," Marsh said. "He asked me to tell you he will return before midday and that you are to remain inside the estate until he does." "Rode out where?" He did not say. A pause. He rarely does. Tessa ate because her body needed it, not because she had any interest in food. She ate methodically, looking out the window at the grounds, at the iron gate standing solid and closed at the end of the path, at the tree line beyond it that looked so ordinary now in the morning light. She thought about Pelwick. She had seen him twice, at social gatherings before everything had fallen apart. A neat, mild-looking man with pleasant manners and quick, watchful eyes. The kind of man who was very easy to underestimate. The kind of man who understood that the most dangerous position was always the one that appeared the least threatening. He had sent those 2 men last night. He had known she had the document, which meant he had been watching her long enough and closely enough to know exactly what Corvin had given her before he died. The question that sat heavily in her chest was how much else he knew. She was still thinking about it when the door of the breakfast room opened and a woman walked in. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair pinned with perfect precision, and a face that was still handsome in the way of a woman who had been beautiful and had moved through that stage of life without losing anything essential. She wore dark traveling clothes, and she carried herself with the particular ease of someone who was entirely comfortable taking up space in any room she entered. She looked at Tessa with sharp, intelligent eyes and said, "You must be the Brow girl. I am Lady Constance Vile. I am the Duke's aunt, and I have just ridden 3 hours to get here, so please do not waste my time with pleasantness." Tessa blinked. I was not planning to. Lady Vale sat down across from her, looked at the food on the table, picked up a piece of bread and said, "Good. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." So Tessa told her. All of it. 3 months of it, from the morning she had arrived at the prison and seen her father through a barred window, looking 20 years older than the last time she had seen him, to the moment she had stood at the Keldran gate in the storm. She told it plainly and in order, and Lady Vale listened without interrupting once, which Tessa suspected was not something she did for many people. When she finished, Lady Vale was quiet for a moment. "Pelwick," she said. "Yes, I know that name. I have known that name for longer than you have been alive, and I have been waiting for someone to give me a legitimate reason to do something about it." She looked at Tessa with those sharp eyes. "You have given me several." "What will you do?" Tessa asked. "What I do best," Lady Vale said. "I will talk to people, the right people, in the right rooms, with the right information placed in front of them." She paused. "My nephew uses documents and law. I use society. Between the two of us, Pelwick will find there is no comfortable corner left for him anywhere." The sound of hooves came from outside. Tessa went to the window and saw the Duke riding up the gravel path on a dark horse, moving at a pace that said the ride back had been faster than the ride out. Behind him came another rider she did not recognize, a younger man in plain clothes carrying a sealed bag. She went to the front hall. The Duke came through the door with the particular energy of someone who had already done 3 things before most people had opened their eyes. He saw Lady Vale first and said, "You came." "Obviously," she said. He looked at Tessa. "The rider behind me is from Heldwick Prison. I rode to meet him on the road." He reached into his coat and held out a folded paper. "Your father received written notice this morning that his execution has been stayed pending new evidence. He is not to be touched." Tessa took the paper. She unfolded it. She read it twice. Her hands were not entirely steady. "That is not a pardon," the Duke said, his voice careful and even. "It is a stay. It means we have time. It does not mean the work is finished." "I know," she said. She folded the paper and held it against her chest. 9 days ago, she had been in a coaching inn, 2 counties south, watching a dying man write the most important words of her father's life with a shaking hand, and she had thought, in the darkest part of that night, that she was going to fail, that she was going to do everything right and still fail, because that was the kind of world it was, one where the powerful protected each other, and the people who could not afford protection simply fell. She had been wrong. Not because the world had changed, but because she had walked through a storm and knocked on the right door. "What happens next?" she said. "Next," the Duke said, setting his coat aside and moving toward the study with the focused calm of a man who had a great deal of work ahead of him and was entirely prepared for it. "We take this apart piece by piece. Pelwick, the magistrate, the witnesses, all of it. Carefully and completely." He paused in the study doorway and looked back at her. "And you are going to help me. You know this case better than anyone. Every detail you uncovered, every name, every connection. I need all of it." Tessa straightened. 3 months of fighting alone had taught her something about herself. It had taught her that she was more capable than she had believed, that she could carry more than she had thought possible, that fear was something you could feel and still move through. But it had also taught her the cost of carrying everything alone. "All right," she said. "Then let us begin." Lady Vile, passing through the hall with her travelling coat still on, said without breaking stride, "Finally, someone in this family who moves at a sensible pace." The study had become a war room. Every surface held something. Maps of the county with routes marked in ink, lists of names cross-referenced against dates, witness statements from the original trial laid side by side with the notes Tessa had kept in a small journal she had carried through every inn and every rain-soaked road for 3 months. The Duke had pulled files from his own records that connected Pelwick to 2 other cases where justice had bent in directions it should not have bent, and those files now sat open beside Corvin's signed confession like pieces of a puzzle that had always belonged together but had never been in the same room before. Tessa and the Duke had been working for 4 hours straight. She had not expected this. She had expected him to take the document, thank her, and manage the rest through channels she had no access to. Instead, he had pulled a chair to the opposite side of the desk, opened his own notebooks, and said, "Start with the witnesses. Tell me everything you found about them." So she had, and he had listened the way he read, with total, unhurried attention, asking precise questions at precise moments, never interrupting the flow of what she was saying, but catching every detail that mattered and turning it over in his hands like a stone he was checking for weight. His name, she had learned over the course of the morning, was Kalen. Duke Kalen Vora of Keldran. She had heard it from Lady Vale, who used it without ceremony. The Duke himself had not offered it, and she had not asked. But it sat in the back of her mind now, with a familiarity she had not invited and could not quite dismiss. "The second witness," she said, pointing to the name on the trial record. "A man called Fenso. He was a stable hand at Lord Grieve's estate for 2 years before his death. He left that position 3 weeks before the poisoning, and no one thought to question why. I found him 6 weeks ago, working at a coaching inn in the next county. He would not speak to me directly, but the innkeeper told me he had come into money recently, enough to pay 3 months of lodging in advance. Paid to testify, the Duke said. Paid and then moved, Tessa said, far enough away that no one from the original case would run into him accidentally. But not far enough, the Duke said, looking at the name. He did not think anyone was looking, Tessa said. Davin knocked and entered without waiting, which told her something about the usual atmosphere of this house. He was carrying a folded note, and his expression was tight. "Rider from the capital," he said. "From Lord Sen." The Duke took the note, read it, and set it flat on the desk. "Pelwick has left his townhouse," he said, "as of yesterday evening. Lord Sen's man watched him take a carriage south with 2 trunks and no declared destination." The room went quiet. Tessa understood immediately. He knows the men he sent here were taken. He knows the confession exists, and that you have it. He is running. He is repositioning, the Duke said, which was a more precise and more dangerous way of saying the same thing. A man like Pelwick does not simply run. He moves to a place where he has more control and more allies, and from there he finds another way to manage the problem. If he reaches the southern ports, Tessa said. He will not reach the southern ports, the Duke said. He was already writing. The speed and precision of his hand had not changed, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders now, a forward lean that had not been there an hour ago. Lady Vile appeared in the doorway. She had changed from her travelling clothes into something sharper, and was wearing the expression of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment for a considerable portion of her life. "He is moving," the Duke said without looking up. "I heard," she said. "I also have news from my own sources, which I will note are significantly faster than yours." She came into the room and placed her own folded paper on the desk. "Pelwick sent a letter 2 days ago to a judge in the Western Circuit named Orath. I have a copy." The Duke stopped writing and looked at it. "How?" Tessa said, before she could stop herself. Lady Vale looked at her with calm, absolute composure. "I have been cultivating the right friendships for 40 years, Miss Brow. I did not do it to be decorative." The Duke read the letter. His expression did not change dramatically, but Tessa had been sitting across from him for 4 hours and had learned the small language of his face well enough to know that what he was reading mattered. "He is trying to have the stay overturned," he said. "He has told Orath that the new evidence is fabricated, that Corvin's confession was produced under duress by a desperate family and should carry no legal weight." Tessa's hands pressed flat against the desk. Corvin was dying. He had nothing left to gain and nothing left to lose. He signed that document of his own will. "We know that," the Duke said. "Orath does not. And if Pelwick reaches him before we do and plants enough doubt, a sympathetic ear in the right position could complicate the stay significantly." A silence opened in the room. Then Tessa said, "How quickly can you travel to the Western Circuit?" The Duke looked at her. "I have ridden farther than you think," she said. "And I know Corvin's account better than anyone. If this comes to a direct hearing before Orath, you need someone who was there when Corvin spoke. Someone who can speak to his state of mind, his clarity, his intention." She met his eyes without flinching. "Take me with you." Marsh appeared in the doorway, looked at the room, looked at the Duke, and waited. "Prepare 2 horses," the Duke said, "and send for Hob. He rides with us." They left within the hour. The western road was long and exposed, cutting through open farmland with low hedgerows and wide grey skies pressing down from above. Tessa rode alongside the Duke, with Hob behind them, and Davin further back, covering the rear of the group with the quiet vigilance he seemed to carry as naturally as breathing. They did not speak much on the road. There was a comfortable efficiency to the silence, the kind that exists between people who have already said the important things and do not need to fill space with lesser ones. It was in the second hour of riding that Hob made a short, sharp sound from behind them. Tessa looked back. 3 riders had appeared on the road behind them, coming fast. Too fast for travellers, too deliberate for coincidence. "Pelwick's men," the Duke said, not loudly, just a statement of fact. "How many behind Hob?" Tessa asked. 3 on the road," Davin called from the rear. 2 more coming through the field on the left. 5 in total, moving with coordination. This was not a warning. This was an attempt to stop them reaching Orath before Pelwick did, and whoever had planned it on a road with no shelter and no witnesses. The Duke pulled his horse left toward a farm track that cut between 2 fields, narrow and overgrown, the kind of track that a large group could not ride 4 abreast on. "Stay close," he said. They moved fast. The track was rough and uneven, and the horses picked through it at a pace that required full attention. Behind them, the sound of hooves split, 2 riders following the track, the others circling the field edge, trying to cut them off at the far end. Hob dropped back deliberately, positioning himself as a barrier in the narrow track behind them. Tessa kept her horse moving and did not look back. She fixed her eyes on the Duke ahead of her and matched his pace exactly, leaning forward, keeping low. The track opened abruptly into a wider lane, and the Duke swung right toward a cluster of farm buildings 50 yards ahead. He rode directly into the yard, pulled up, and dismounted in one movement. A farmer appeared in the doorway of the largest building, staring. "I am the Duke of Keldran," the Duke said, with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "I need your yard for 10 minutes, and I need you to send your boy to the next village for the constable, now." The farmer stared for one more second, then turned and shouted for someone named Tal. The two riders who had followed the track appeared at the lane entrance and stopped when they saw the yard, the farm buildings, the Duke standing in the open, and Hob, who had emerged from the track behind them and was now positioned at their backs with the patient, immovable quality of a man who had decided this was where things ended. It was not a fight. It became, instead, a very uncomfortable wait for the constable, during which the 5 riders found themselves unable to leave, unwilling to escalate, and increasingly aware that they had severely miscalculated how this morning would go. When the constable arrived, followed shortly by his deputy and a third man from the village who had come out of curiosity and stayed out of civic interest, the Duke presented the relevant documents, gave a precise account of what had occurred, and had all 5 men taken into custody within 20 minutes. Davin watched the last of them being led away and said, almost to himself, "That is the second time in 2 days." "Third," Hob said, without elaborating. They rode on. Judge Orath was a small, dry man, with the eyes of someone who had heard every possible version of every possible story, and retained the professional habit of believing none of them until proven otherwise. He received them in his private chambers at the circuit courthouse with the careful neutrality of a man who had already received one visitor that morning and was now receiving a second, and was doing the arithmetic. Pelwick had arrived 2 hours ahead of them. Tessa had known it the moment she saw Orath's face. The Duke set the documents on the table. All of them. Corvin's signed confession, the letters, the names of the men taken into custody at the Keldran estate the night before and on the Western Road that morning. The file connects Pelwick to 2 earlier cases of interfered justice. Lady Vale's copy of the letter Pelwick had sent to Orath himself, which the Duke placed last, directly on top, and left there without comment. Orath looked at that last document for a long moment. Then he looked at Tessa. "You were present when this confession was given," he said. "I was the only person present," she said. Corvin asked for it that way. He did not want witnesses who could be pressured. He wanted one person he had chosen himself, who had reason to use it properly, and a signature that could not be attributed to anyone else's influence. "Describe his state of mind." "Completely clear," she said. "He was physically weak. He knew he was dying, but he was calm and deliberate, and he read every word of what he signed before he signed it. He asked me to read it back to him once, and I did. He made one correction to a name spelling himself." She paused. A man manufacturing a false document under duress does not stop to correct the spelling. Orath was quiet. Outside the courthouse window, the town went about its ordinary morning. Carts on the cobbles, voices calling across a market square, the entirely indifferent noise of a world that did not know what was being decided in this small room. "Sir Galt Pelwick," Orath said slowly, "has been a figure of significant standing in this circuit for many years." "Yes," the Duke said. "And the documents on that table suggest why that standing has been maintained, and at whose expense." He let that sit for a moment. "I am not asking you to convict anyone today, Orath. I am asking you to uphold the stay and refer the full matter to the Lord Chief Justice in the capital, That is all. Let it be examined properly, in the right place, by the right authority. That is what the law asks of you." Orath looked at the documents again. He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his pen. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of formal hearings, submitted evidence, legal correspondence moving between the capital and the circuit at a pace that felt agonizing to Tessa, but which, the Duke said, with a steadiness she had come to rely on, was actually fast for what it was. Lady Vale worked the rooms of society with a focused and ruthless grace, placing the right information in front of the right people, framing the story in terms that the powerful could not ignore without looking complicit. Davin rode more miles in those 3 weeks than most men rode in a year, carrying sealed letters between the Duke and his contacts in the capital. Marsh ran the household through it all with the unshakable competence of someone who understood that the most important support a person could offer was invisible. Pelwick was arrested on the 14th day, intercepted at a southern port with 2 trunks and a 3rd identity prepared. The magistrate who had overseen Tessa's father's trial resigned his position on the 15th day, before the formal investigation reached him. The 2 witnesses were found and brought in for questioning on the 17th. On the 21st day, Aldous Brow walked out of Heldwick Prison. Tessa was there. She had ridden through the night to be there, arriving as the grey morning light was just beginning to colour the eastern sky, standing at the prison gate with her hands folded and her back straight and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. The Duke had offered to come with her, and she had told him, quietly, that this moment was one she needed to meet alone. He had understood without requiring explanation, which was something she had noticed he did often. When the gate opened and her father came through it, he was thinner than she remembered, and older, around the eyes, and he moved with the careful step of a man who had spent months in a small space. He saw her and stopped. She crossed the distance between them. They stood together for a long time without speaking. She held his arm and he put his hand over hers, and they watched the sun come up over the flat eastern land together, which was enough, which was more than enough. He said eventually, "You did this." "I had help," she said. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She told him all of it on the long ride back south. Her father listened with the particular quality of a man hearing a story that concerns him, but from which he has been entirely absent, moving through surprise, through something that looked like grief for what she had carried alone, and finally into a quiet, grateful stillness. When she reached the part about the Duke, he was silent for a while. Then he said, "I would like to meet him." The meeting happened 2 weeks later, at a dinner that Lady Vale organized with her usual confident disregard for anyone who might have preferred less ceremony. It was held at the Keldran estate, which Tessa rode to with her father and her sister Brinley, who had spent the 3 weeks of the legal proceedings alternating between furious anxiety and a practical usefulness that had surprised everyone, including herself. Brinley had managed the Brow household with a steady hand, corresponded with Marsh about her sister's safety, and arrived at the Keldran estate that evening with the bright, watchful eyes of someone who intended to observe everything and forget nothing. Aldous Brow and the Duke of Keldran sat together after dinner in the study, where Tessa had first placed Corvin's letter on a desk in the middle of the night, and they talked for 2 hours. About law and its failures and its possibilities. About the particular kind of courage it took to fight for something when the system designed to provide it had turned its back. About what it meant to have power and what it demanded of you. When Aldous came out of the study, he found Tessa waiting in the corridor. He looked at her for a moment. "He is a good man," he said simply. She nodded. She knew. What she also knew, and had been knowing for some time, with the particular clarity of something that does not announce itself but simply arrives and waits to be acknowledged, was that the Duke of Keldran was something more than that to her. He was the person who had taken the heaviest thing she had ever carried, and had not tried to take it from her, but had stood beside her, and carried it alongside her, which was a different thing entirely, and mattered more than she had words for. She did not yet know what to do with that knowledge. She was a woman whose father had just been freed from prison, whose family was still rebuilding itself, who had spent 3 months running on determination and very little else. She was not in a position to think about the future in any personal sense. But the future had a way of arriving, whether or not you were ready for it. 6 months later, in the same sitting room where she had first sat before a fire with mud still on her boots and a sealed document pressed against her chest, the Duke of Keldran got down on one knee before Tessa Brow and asked her to be his wife. He did not dress it in poetry or grand speeches. He looked at her directly, the way he always did, and he told her that he had not known what a quiet house felt like until she had filled it with noise and purpose. He told her that he had spent years being useful to the law and to the county and to everyone except himself, and that she was the first person who had made him want something entirely his own. He told her that he understood if she needed time, that he was not asking out of obligation or gratitude, that he was asking because the thought of her leaving and not returning was something he found he could not comfortably accept. Then he waited. Tessa looked at him for a long moment. This man who had opened his door in a storm, who had read a document twice and stayed up all night writing letters for a stranger, who had ridden hard roads beside her and stood in a judge's chamber and never once made her feel small for needing help. She said yes, clearly, without hesitation, in exactly the plain and direct way he had asked. Brinley, who had positioned herself near the door and heard every single word, did not even pretend she had not been listening. She let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh, pressed both hands over her mouth, and ran to find Lady Vale. Lady Vale received the news sitting by the fire in the drawing room with a cup of tea in her hand. She listened to Brinley's breathless account, set her cup down with great composure, and said, "Well, it only took him 6 months longer than it should have." Then she smiled, which was something people who knew her well said she did rarely, and meant entirely when she did. The Duke of Keldran had spent years being described as cold, unreachable, and solitary, a man of law and iron will with no warmth in him. People had written about him that way in letters and repeated it in drawing rooms until it had become the accepted truth of who he was. He had allowed it because it kept unnecessary people at a comfortable distance, and because for a long time he had genuinely not known what else he was supposed to be. She had changed that. She had seen him clearly. And being seen clearly, after years of being visible only as a function or a force, was the kind of thing that didn't leave a person unchanged. The storm had brought her to his gate. She had walked into his house as a stranger. She left it, 6 months later, as its duchess. And the man who had once been described in every parlour in the county as cold and untouchable stood at the altar of the Keldran estate chapel and watched her walk toward him with the expression of someone who has spent a long time in the dark and has finally, completely, and without any reservation at all, stepped into the light.